The heavy mahogany doors of the ducal estate slammed shut, the echo reverberating through the freezing, cavernous halls like a death knell. Rain lashed violently against the towering stained-glass windows, casting long fractured shadows across the marble floor. Standing in the center of the grand foyer, her white silk wedding gown drenched at the hem and stained with the mud of a scandal that had rocked the entire empire, was Clara. Her hands trembled, not from the biting chill of the autumn storm, but from the suffocating realization that the ring on her finger was not a symbol of love, but a golden shackle. Before her stood her new husband, Julian Sterling. His tall, imposing silhouette blocked the warmth of the roaring hearth behind him, casting his striking, sharp features into darkness. Julian's eyes, usually a piercing, mesmerizing blue, were now chips of jagged ice. There was no joy in his gaze, no tenderness for the woman who had just vowed her life to him. There was only a deep, venomous resentment that made the air between them thick and hard to breathe. He stepped forward, his leather boots clicking sharply against the stone, stopping just inches away from her. The scent of rain, expensive cologne, and pure bitterness radiated from him. "You have your title, Clara," Julian whispered, his voice dangerously low, cutting through the howling wind outside like a razor. "You played your games, orchestrated that pathetic trap, and forced my hand to save what remains of our family's reputations. But do not mistake this ring for a promise of happiness. You wanted to be my duchess so badly? You will bear the name, but you will live in the freezing dark you created. I will make sure every single day in this house is a living reminder of the heartbreak you caused. I will never touch you. I will never look at you with warmth. I will make you regret the very day you crossed my path." Clara swallowed hard, a lump of raw emotion burning in her throat. She wanted to scream, to tear open her chest and show him the truth, that she was innocent, that she had been framed just as badly as he had, and that her heart had beaten only for him since they were children. But looking into his unforgiving, cold eyes, she knew words were useless. The trap had closed, and Julian had already written the story in his mind. He believed she was a manipulative monster who had destroyed his future, and he was going to use his power to punish her for it. Welcome to the channel, my wonderful family. I am so deeply grateful to have you here with us today as we dive into this gripping, emotional journey of betrayal, hidden truths, and the agonizing weight of regret. Before we unveil the dark secrets hidden within the walls of the Sterling estate, take a moment to tell me down in the comments where you are watching from tonight and how you are doing. If you haven't already, please do hit that subscribe button and join our community. Your incredible support keeps these stories alive, and trust me, you will not want to miss a single second of the shocking twist that is about to unfold. Julian turned his back on her without another word, his heavy velvet cloak sweeping behind him as he ascended the grand staircase, leaving his new bride alone in the shadows of the massive, empty foyer. Clara sank to her knees, the heavy silk of her gown pooling around her on the cold marble. She pressed a trembling hand against her chest, feeling the frantic, painful hammering of her heart. She was completely isolated, trapped in a marriage born of malice, wed to a powerful duke who had vowed to destroy her spirit piece by piece. Could Clara survive the systematic cruelty of a man she secretly loved? How long could a human heart endure absolute coldness before it finally broke or worse, turned to stone? As she stared up at the dark, winding staircase where Julian had disappeared, a chilling realization washed over her. The man who was supposed to be her protector had just become her greatest tormentor, and the true nightmare was only just beginning. The morning that followed the wedding brought no sunlight, only a thick, suffocating gray fog that clung to the endless acres of the Sterling estate. Clara sat at the edge of the massive, unheated four-poster bed in the eastern wing, the draftiest, most isolated section of the mansion, deliberately assigned to her by Julian's head housekeeper. Clara's fingers, pale and stiff from the cold, clutched a small, worn silver locket. Inside was a faded sketch of Julian from 5 years ago, before his father's sudden death, before the dark rumors began, and before the light in his eyes had been completely extinguished by bitterness. Clara's deepest desire had never been the grand title of Duchess, nor the sprawling wealth of the Sterling line. Her heart had belonged to Julian since she was a girl of 16, back when he would secretly ride across the valley just to bring her rare wildflowers and laugh with a warmth that could melt winter. Her greatest fear was not his anger, but the terrifying reality that she was completely invisible to him now. He looked at her and saw only a phantom of betrayal. She had entered this forced union harboring a fragile, desperate hope that if she was patient enough, if she bore his anger with grace, she could eventually prove her innocence and help him find the gentle soul he had buried beneath his armor. A sharp, mocking knock shattered the silence. The door swung open to reveal Laura Vance, Julian's widowed cousin and the woman who had running control of the household since the previous Duchess passed away. Laura stood with a rigid, icy posture, her eyes scanning Clara's modest, unpacking trunk with open disdain. "The Duke expects his household to run with absolute precision, Clara," Laura said, deliberately omitting her title. "He has made it explicitly clear that you are not to meddle in the affairs of the estate, nor are you to present yourself at the main dining hall when he has guests. You are a guest here in name only, a permanent reminder of a mistake. If you require anything you may ask the junior maids. Do not look for Julian. He has already left for the capital and he did not leave a word for you." The rejection stung like a physical blow, but Clara merely nodded, lifting her chin to keep her tears from falling in front of her tormentor. When Laura swept out of the room, Clara rose and walked to the window, watching the distant iron gates of the estate. She knew the staff was already whispering. She could hear the muffled giggles of the housemaids in the corridors, mocking the scandalous Duchess, who had been abandoned on her very first night. But Clara was not completely alone. Later that afternoon, as she attempted to navigate the labyrinthine corridors of the manor, she encountered Arthur Pendleton, the elderly head butler who had served the Sterling family for over 4 decades. Unlike Laura, Arthur bowed deeply, his kind, weathered face etched with a profound, unspoken sorrow. "Your Grace," Arthur murmured, his voice a gentle balm to her bleeding pride. "The library has been warmed should you wish to read." "The Duke? His mind is clouded by a great deal of grief and deception, my lady. But this house has been dark for too long. I pray your presence might change that." Arthur's words hinted at something deeper, a hidden layer to the scandal that had forced their marriage. Clara knew that someone had deliberately engineered the compromising situation that ruined her reputation and forced Julian's hand. Someone wanted them bound together in hatred. But who? And why did Julian refuse to see that she was a victim in this trap as well? Meanwhile, miles away in his private carriage, Julian stared out at the passing countryside, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He hated himself for the burning anger that consumed him, but he hated Clara more for making him feel it. His deepest motivation was to protect his family's ancient name from further disgrace, but beneath his pride was a raw, bleeding wound. He had felt a terrifying pull toward Clara for years, a hidden desire he had fiercely fought against. When the scandal broke, it felt like an ultimate betrayal, as if she had used his unspoken weakness against him to climb into a position of power. He vowed that he would never let her see the hold she had over him. He would starve her of affection until she begged to leave. What hidden secrets were Laura Vance and the high society of the capital keeping from the young Duke? And will Clara's silent resilience be enough to crack the fortress Julian has built around his heart, or will the growing frost destroy them both? 3 months passed in a blur of freezing silences and lonely, heavy nights. Julian had returned from the capital, but he treated Clara like a ghost inhabiting his ancestral home. He walked past her in the corridors without a single glance, sat at the opposite end of the long dining table in absolute silence, and retreated to his study until the early hours of the morning. Clara endured it all, keeping her pain locked deep inside, until the night of the winter solstice gala, the most prestigious event on the high society calendar, hosted right inside the Sterling Grand Ballroom. Clara spent hours preparing, hoping against hope that tonight might be different. She wore a deep emerald velvet gown that complemented the warmth of her eyes, and for the first time in months, a faint, hopeful smile touched her lips. But as she descended the grand staircase to join the festivities, the ballroom fell into a suffocating, judgmental silence. Hundreds of eyes locked onto her, filled with mockery and whispers. Then the crowd parted and Clara's heart shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces. Standing at the center of the room was Julian, looking devastatingly handsome in his formal black doublet. But he wasn't alone. Gliding gracefully by his side, her hand resting intimately on his arm, was Lady Vivian Rostova, Julian's former betrothed, the woman society believed he truly loved before the scandal forced him to marry Clara. Julian was smiling at Vivian, a look of genuine relaxed warmth on his face that he had never once shown his wife. The humiliation was instant and blinding. Laura Vance stood nearby, a smug, triumphant smirk playing on her lips as she watched Clara freeze on the stairs. Julian noticed Clara then, his expression instantly hardening into stone. He didn't offer his hand. He didn't acknowledge her as his duchess. Instead, he deliberately turned his back, escorting Vivian toward the dance floor as if his wife didn't even exist. My beautiful friends, if your heart is aching for Clara right now, please take a moment to drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on Julian's cold actions. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so now to see how Clara finds the strength to rise above this cruelty. Unable to bear the suffocating heat of the room and the cruel whispers of the guests, Clara fled. She rushed out of the side doors and into the snow-covered maze of the estate's rose gardens, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. The biting winter wind stung her skin, but it was nothing compared to the agony in her chest. She collapsed onto a stone bench, her breaths coming in ragged, painful gasps. It is a tragedy to see a duchess weep in the dark while lesser women wear her crown. A smooth, deep voice resonated through the freezing air. Clara gasped, spinning around to see a tall, striking man stepping out from the shadows of the snow-laden hedges. He was impeccably dressed, his dark eyes brimming with a dangerous mix of charm and intense curiosity. This was Thomas Halloway, a powerful, enigmatic earl from a rival territory, known for his brilliant mind and his long-standing bitter rivalry with the Sterling family. Lord Halloway, Clara said, quickly wiping her tears, her voice trembling as she tried to regain her dignity. You should not be out here. I am merely catching my breath. Thomas stepped closer, his gaze locked onto her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He didn't look at her with the mockery she had seen in the ballroom. He looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world. I came out here because the ballroom lost all its beauty the moment you walked out, Your Grace. Julian Sterling is a fool blinded by his own arrogance. He does not see the treasure he holds, but others do. Before Clara could process his words, Thomas reached down and gently picked up a delicate velvet pouch that had fallen from her gown. As he handed it back, his fingers brushed against hers, sending an unexpected jolt of electricity through her veins. But as he pulled his hand away, a small, intricate silver key slipped from his sleeve, landing silently in the snow. Thomas bowed deeply, his eyes flashing with a hidden, dangerous intent. Remember, Duchess, a cage is still a cage no matter how grand. And sometimes the key to your freedom is closer than you think. With a final, lingering look, Thomas vanished back into the shadows of the gala. Clara stared down at the snow, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs as she picked up the silver key he had left behind. It was etched with the crest of the Sterling family's private archival vault, a place no one was allowed to enter. A sudden realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. The scandal that had ruined her life, the trap that had forced this miserable marriage, wasn't an accident. Thomas knew something. This key held the answers to the conspiracy that had destroyed her reputation and Julian's trust. But to use it meant crossing a line of no return. Would Clara dare to unlock the dark secrets of the Sterling family vault? And what will happen when Julian discovers that his greatest rival has taken a sudden, dangerous interest in his abandoned wife? The silver key felt like a shard of ice pressed against Clara's palm as she hurried back toward the eastern wing, her mind racing with a chaotic mixture of dread and determination. The echo of Thomas Halloway's smooth, warning voice repeated in her mind, a stark contrast to the hollow laughter still drifting from the grand ballroom. She knew she was stepping onto a treacherous path, but the humiliation she had suffered tonight had ignited something new inside her. For months, she had been a passive victim of Julian's scorn. She would be silent no longer. Over the next 2 weeks, the atmosphere within the Sterling manor grew increasingly strained. Julian, perhaps sensing the subtle shift in Clara's demeanor, seemed to appear in the corridors more frequently, his icy gaze lingering on her for fractions of a second longer than before. Yet his actions remained performatively cruel. He continued to invite Lady Vivian to the estate under the guise of discussing regional trade alliances, ensuring Clara could hear their shared laughter from the drawing room down the hall. One rainy afternoon, Clara was crossing the grand gallery when she found her path blocked by Laura Vance and Vivian. Vivian wore a triumphant soft pink silk gown, her eyes glinting with malicious satisfaction. "Oh, Clara," Vivian purred, stepping forward with a mock expression of sympathy. Julian and I were just discussing the upcoming spring gala in the capital. It is such a shame your fragile health prevents you from traveling. Julian agrees it is best for the family name if you remain here where it is quiet. My health is perfectly fine, Lady Vivian, Clara replied calmly, her voice steady despite the furious pounding of her heart. And as the Duchess, I assure you my position requires no one to speak on my behalf. Least of all a guest. Laura's face contorted with rage. How dare you speak to? That is enough. Julian's deep, commanding voice sliced through the tension as he walked into the gallery, his dark eyes scanning the three women. Clara met his gaze directly, refusing to look down as she usually did. A flash of surprise flickered across Julian's sharp features at her newfound defiance, replaced instantly by his customary mask of indifference. Vivian, Laura, leave us, Julian ordered coldly. Once they were alone, the silence between them grew heavy, charged with an undeniable, suffocating magnetism. Julian stepped closer, his shadow falling over her, his jaw tightly clenched. You are growing bold, Clara. Do not think that because I allow you to roam this house, you have the right to insult my guests. I did not insult her, Julian. I merely reminded her of who I am, Clara said, her voice dropping to a whisper filled with a raw, painful vulnerability. You may hate me and you may wish to punish me forever, but I am your wife. If you wish to humiliate me, do it yourself. Do not use other women to do your work. For a split second, Julian's mask cracked. His eyes darkened with an intense, burning emotion. A volatile mix of fury, confusion, and a deep, buried attraction he had spent months trying to starve. He reached out, his large hand gripping the carved wooden railing beside her, trapping her against the wall. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest, see the slight tremble in his lower lip. You think this is a game? Julian hissed, his breath hot against her cheek. You think a few brave words erase the betrayal that bound us together? I never betrayed you. Clara cried out, her eyes shining with unshed tears as she looked directly into his soul. Look at me, Julian. If you truly believe I am the monster who orchestrated our ruin, look me in the eyes and tell me you see guilt. Julian froze, his gaze locked onto her face. His eyes searched hers, tracing the genuine agony and fierce honesty written in her features. For the first time, a shadow of profound doubt crossed his mind. His breathing hitched and his gaze drifted down to her lips, the tension between them snapping like a taut wire. The pull to pull her into his arms and break his own vow was terrifyingly strong. But before the moment could break, the heavy footsteps of a guard echoed in the distant hall. Julian instantly recoiled, his expression slamming shut like an iron gate. He turned on his heel and strode away without another word, leaving Clara trembling in the corridor, her heart aching from the near-miss of his touch. If you are holding your breath waiting for Julian to finally see the truth, please let me know by leaving a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss the moment his icy armor completely shatters. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Clara chose that very night to act. When the mansion fell into a deep, midnight silence, she slipped out of her room, clutching the silver key. She navigated the dark, shadow-drenched corridors to the forbidden western tower, where the family's private archival vault was sealed. Her hands shook as she inserted the key into the heavy iron lock. With a soft click, the heavy door swung open, revealing rows of ancient ledgers and private family documents. Clara slipped inside, her lantern casting long, flickering shadows against the walls. She began searching through the recent correspondence files, her fingers flying through the papers until she found a leather-bound journal hidden beneath a false bottom in Julian's late father's desk. As she opened it, a loose letter fell to the floor. Clara picked it up, her eyes widening as she read the elegant, flowing script. It was a letter addressed to Thomas Halloway, dated just days before her forced wedding. The letter detailed the exact layout of the garden where Clara and Julian had been set up, explicitly planning the false scandal to force Julian into a marriage that would alienate him from his political allies. But it was the signature at the bottom that made the blood run completely cold in Clara's veins. It wasn't written by a stranger. It was signed by Laura Vance. Clara gasped, dropping the letter onto the desk. Her own family member, the woman running the Duke's household, had orchestrated their mutual ruin. But before Clara could gather the papers, a sudden, heavy shadow fell across the threshold of the vault. Clara spun around, her heart stopping. Standing in the doorway, his eyes dark with absolute fury and a dangerous sense of betrayal, was Julian. The lantern light flickered violently between them, casting monstrous shadows against the cold stone walls of the vault. Julian stood in the doorway like an executioner, his chest heaving under his dark silk nightshirt, his eyes burning with a terrifying blend of absolute fury and deep, wounded betrayal. He stepped into the room, his boots clicking with an ominous weight that made the very air freeze. "I warned you, Clara," Julian whispered, his voice dangerously calm, though a savage undercurrent vibrated through every syllable. "I warned you not to push me. But to break into my family's private archives? To spy on my bloodline? Who sent you? Was it Holloway?" He lunged forward, his large hand slamming onto the mahogany desk right beside her, trapping her beneath his towering frame. "Tell me the truth. Were you his spy from the very beginning? Was our entire marriage just a play to ruin the sterling name?" "No. Julian, listen to me," Clara cried out, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered emotion. She didn't shrink away from him this time. Instead, she grabbed the fallen letter from the desk, her fingers trembling as she thrust the parchment against his chest. "I didn't break into this room to hurt you. I came to find the truth because I could not bear the weight of your hatred for another second. Look at it, Julian. Look at the handwriting. Look at the signature." Julian snatched the paper from her grip, his jaw clenched so tightly a vein throbbed on his temple. He tore his gaze from her terrified, tear-streaked face and looked down at the letter. For the first time, his icy composure faltered. His eyes scanned the elegant, looping script, recognizing it instantly. He read the precise details of the trap, the deliberate positioning of the guards, the anonymous tips sent to the high society tabloids, the cold blueprint that had shattered his life and bound him to a woman he swore to despise. And there at the bottom, sealed in crimson wax and signed with an unmistakable flourish, was the name of his own cousin, Laura Vance. Julian reeled backward as if he had been physically struck, the paper fluttering slightly in his suddenly weak grip. "No," he breathed, his voice stripped of all its venom, leaving behind only a hollow, devastating shock. She wouldn't. She's family. She raced me after my mother." "She lied to you, Julian," Clara said softly, stepping closer, her heart breaking for the agonizing pain rewriting itself across his features. The fierce, untouchable Duke looked suddenly fragile, a man whose entire foundation had just turned to ash beneath his feet. "She wanted to isolate you. She knew that if we were forced together in hatred, you would never form the alliances you needed to protect the territory. She used my love for you and your pride to build a prison for us both." Julian stared at the letter, his mind racing through the past 3 months. Every cruel word he had spat at Clara, every night he had left her freezing in the eastern wing, every public humiliation he had orchestrated to break her spirit. She had been innocent. The woman who had quietly endured his systematic cruelty, who had looked at him with nothing but silent, enduring devotion while he tore her dignity to shreds, was entirely blameless. A wave of profound, suffocating guilt crashed over him, so intense it made him choke on his own breath. He looked up at her, his piercing blue eyes suddenly glistening with unshed tears. The fierce mask of the ruthless Duke was entirely gone, leaving only a man drowning in his own catastrophic errors. "Clara, what have I done to you?" he whispered, his voice cracking with a raw, agonizing vulnerability. You didn't do any of it." "I only ever wanted you, Julian," Clara whispered back, a solitary tear escaping her eye and tracing a path down her pale cheek. "Even when you hated me. Even when you made me feel like nothing." My dear friends, if your heart is breaking for the devastating truth Julian has just realized, please leave a comment down below and tell me if you think he deserves Clara's forgiveness. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to do it right now because the story is about to take an even more intense turn. Julian took a trembling step toward her, his hand reaching out as if she were a fragile spirit that might vanish if he touched her. When his fingers finally brushed her cheek, wiping away her tear, a visible shudder ran through his entire frame. The touch was electric, charged with 3 months of suppressed passion, unyielding tension, and an undeniable attraction that had finally broken through the ice. He cupped her face in his large, warm hands, his gaze locking onto her lips with a desperate, starving intensity. "Forgive me," he groaned against her skin, his pride completely shattered as he pulled her flush against his chest. Claire, please. I have been so blind. Before she could answer, his lips crashed down onto hers. It wasn't the cold, forceful kiss of a demanding husband, but a desperate, passionate plea for salvation. He kissed her with everything he had, pouring all his unspoken regret, his hidden longing, and the sudden, terrifying realization of how deeply he needed her into the embrace. Clara gasped against his mouth, her hands automatically rising to grip his shirt, pulling him closer as the walls of the secret vault seemed to fade away around them. For a brief, breathtaking moment, their souls finally met in the dark, united by a shared, raw vulnerability. But just as the warmth of his embrace threatened to heal the wounds of the past, the heavy oak door of the vault creaked open further. Standing in the shadows of the corridor, her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated venom, was Laura Vance. She looked at the letter in Julian's hand, then at the protective way his arms were wrapped around Clara. She realized instantly that her empire of lies had collapsed. A cold, sinister smile slowly spread across Laura's lips. "You think you've won, Clara?" she hissed into the dark room, her voice dripping with a dangerous promise of retribution. "You've only unlocked a door you can never close again." The morning after the confrontation in the vault, the Sterling estate was plunged into a terrifying, chaotic nightmare. Clara woke up early in her eastern wing bedroom, her lips still tingling from Julian's desperate, passionate kiss, a fragile spark of hope finally warming her chest. But the moment she stepped out into the corridor, the heavy smell of smoke and iron hit her senses, shattering her peace. Downstairs, the grand foyer was a scene of absolute devastation. Imperial guards dressed in heavy iron armor stood at the base of the staircase, their unsheathed swords gleaming coldly in the dim light. Standing before them, his hands bound tightly behind his back in heavy steel chains, was Julian. His dark hair was disheveled, a deep, bleeding gash cutting across his left cheekbone, but his eyes were blazing with a furious, unyielding defiance. "What is the meaning of this?" Clara screamed, rushing down the stairs, her heart hammering violently against her ribs. She tried to reach her husband, but two heavily armored guards stepped forward, their long spears crossing to form a brutal barrier between them. "Stay back, Your Grace," the captain of the guard commanded, his voice devoid of any warmth or sympathy. "By order of the High Imperial Council, Duke Julian Sterling is under arrest for treason against the crown. He is accused of leaking highly classified territorial defenses to our sworn enemies, the Holloway clan." "That is a lie," Clara cried out, her eyes flying to Julian. "It is a setup, Clara." Julian roared, his voice straining against the guards holding him down. He didn't look like the untouchable, arrogant duke anymore. He looked desperate, his gaze locked onto his wife with a terrifying, protective panic. "Laura." She took the ledgers from the vault before dawn. "He planted forged documents in my study. Don't let her near you, Clara. Run." Before he could say another word, a heavy iron hilt was slammed ruthlessly into Julian's stomach, cutting off his breath in a painful gasp. Clara shrieked his name, her soul tearing as they dragged him out into the lashing rain, throwing him into the back of a black barred prisoner carriage. As the carriage sped away into the stormy horizon, a cold, mocking laugh echoed from the top of the grand staircase. Clara spun around, her eyes wide with fury. Standing there, draped in a luxurious black velvet cloak, was Laura Vance. Beside her stood Lady Vivian, a look of smug, victorious malice on her face. "I warned you, Clara," Laura purred, gliding down the marble steps like a serpent approaching its prey. "You thought you could destroy my position here? If I cannot control the sterling fortune through Julian, I will burn his entire legacy to ash. The Imperial Council has already stripped him of his title. By tomorrow night he will be executed for treason, and this estate will belong to the crown, and to those who helped expose his crimes." "You won't get away with this," Clara whispered, her body trembling with a potent mixture of deep despair and volatile anger. "I will go to the capital myself. I will tell them the truth." "Who will believe you?" Vivian mocked, stepping forward. "You are the scandalous Duchess. A woman he publicly humiliated for months. The entire empire knows he despised you. Why would anyone believe you would risk your life to save a man who treated you like garbage? You're alone, Claire. Completely powerless. My wonderful family, if your heart is pounding with terror for Julian and Clara right now, please drop a comment below and tell me if you think Clara can save him in time. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do it right now. Our protagonist is at her absolute breaking point, and she needs your support for what comes next. The realization hit Clara like a physical blow. She was entirely isolated. Her husband was locked in a dark, high-security imperial dungeon, facing a swift execution. The estate was overrun by corrupt guards, and the woman who had spent years torturing her spirit had just delivered the final fatal blow. She ran back to her room, locking the door behind her as tears of pure desperation finally overflowed. She collapsed against the heavy wood, the suffocating weight of hopelessness pressing down on her chest until she could barely breathe. Julian had finally seen the truth. He had finally held her with real love, only to be torn away from her forever. As the hours ticked away toward twilight, a soft, cautious knock sounded at her balcony window. Clara gasped, quickly wiping her eyes and pulling a small decorative dagger from her nightstand. She crept toward the glass, pushing the heavy velvet curtains aside. Standing on the rain-slicked balcony, soaked to the bone, was the elderly butler, Arthur Pendleton. In his trembling hands he held a dark riding cloak and a heavy leather satchel. Clara threw the window open, helping the old man inside. "Arthur, what are you doing? It's too dangerous." "Your Grace," Arthur panted, his breath ragged as he pressed the satchel into her hands. "Mistress Laura has ordered the guards to lock you in this room by midnight. They mean to ensure you cannot testify. But I know a secret passageway out through the old cellars. Inside this bag are the original journals of the late Duke, the ones Laura forgot to burn. They contain proof of her long-term embezzlement and her secret meetings with the Holloway clan." Clara looked at the bag, a sudden, fierce determination cutting through her despair. "But the capital is a 2-day ride through the treacherous mountain passes, Arthur. Julian's execution is scheduled for tomorrow sunset. I will never make it in time on foot." "Then you must seek help from the one person who has the power and the speed to cross those mountains before dawn," Arthur said, his eyes filled with an ominous, heavy sorrow. "Lord Thomas Holloway. He has the swiftest steeds in the Empire. But crossing his threshold is a dangerous gamble, my lady. He is the Duke's greatest rival, and his intentions toward you are far from pure." Clara stared out into the dark, howling storm. To save the husband who had spent months punishing her, she would have to throw herself into the den of his most dangerous enemy. The situation was utterly hopeless. The stakes were life and death, and one wrong move would mean Julian's head on a spike. The midnight air bit into Clara's skin like needles as she pushed past the heavy iron gates of the Holloway fortress, her lungs burning from a brutal ride through the pitch-black woods. Her dark riding cloak was shredded by thorns, her boots caked in mud, but the desperate ticking of the clock in her mind drowned out the exhaustion tearing at her muscles. Julian's execution was mere hours away. She had no room for fear. The massive fortress doors swung open, revealing Thomas Holloway standing at the top of a grand, dimly lit stone staircase. He looked down at her, his dark eyes widening in genuine astonishment at her disheveled, fierce appearance. He slowly descended, his silk robes flowing behind him. "Duchess," Thomas murmured, a dangerous, intrigued smile playing on his lips as he took in her trembling form. "To what do I owe the honor of a midnight visit from the most elusive woman in the territory? Have you finally realized that the Sterling estate is nothing but a sinking ship?" "I am not here for games, Lord Holloway," Clara gasped, her voice raw but unyielding as she stood tall, refusing to let her vulnerability show. She reached into her leather satchel and pulled out the original journals Arthur had given her, holding them tightly against her chest. "I have the proof that Laura Vance embezzled millions from the Sterling estate and forged the treason documents against Julian. But more importantly, I have the letters detailing her secret dealings with your clan's elders to destabilize the border." Thomas froze, his charming smile instantly vanishing. His eyes darkened, locking onto the leather-bound book with sharp, predatory focus. "You walk into my home and threaten me, Clara?" "No, I am offering you a deal," Clara said, stepping forward, her eyes blazing with a fierce, unbreakable courage that made Thomas blink in surprise. "The Imperial Council believes Julian leaked the defenses to you. If he is executed under that lie, the Crown will launch a full-scale military invasion into your territory to root out treason. Your people will bleed, Thomas. But if you give me your swiftest stallion and ride with me to the capital to present this true evidence, we expose Laura, save Julian, and clear your clan's name from a war you did not start." Thomas stared at her, a profound silence settling over the stone hall. He had expected an abandoned, broken woman begging for protection. Instead he was looking at a true duchess, a woman wielding truth like a sword, willing to walk into the jaws of death to save the man she loved. For the first time, Thomas felt a deep, genuine respect for Clara that transcended his rivalry with Julian. "You are an extraordinary woman, Clara Sterling," Thomas said softly, a genuine, solemn expression replacing his mask of arrogance. He turned to his head guard, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Saddle the midnight stallions. Prepare my personal guard. We ride for the capital at maximum speed. My beautiful family, if you are cheering for Clara's incredible bravery right now, please drop a comment down below and let me know if you think they will make it to the capital before the sunset execution. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do it right now because the final confrontation is about to begin." The ride through the treacherous mountain passes was a blur of thunderous hooves and flying gravel. Clara rode at the front, the wind tearing at her hair, her heart beating in perfect synchronization with the rhythmic pounding of the horse beneath her. She wasn't chasing a shadow anymore. She wasn't the crying girl locked in the eastern wing. She was the architect of their salvation. As the first golden rays of dawn began to break over the distant spires of the imperial capital, Clara felt a sudden, profound shift within herself. The chains of her past humiliation were completely gone, burned away by the fire of her own resilience. She knew Julian loved her. She knew he regretted every drop of sorrow he had ever caused her. And she was going to tear down the world to bring him home. The sky over the imperial capital bled into a deep, ominous crimson as the sun began its final descent toward the horizon. Inside the stone courtyard of the High Imperial Tribunal, a suffocating silence hung over the gathered crowd of nobles and high-ranking officials. At the center of the raised wooden platform stood Julian. His hands were bound in heavy iron manacles, his white linen shirt torn and stained, but his head remained held high with the proud defiance of a true leader. Beside the presiding High Chancellor stood Laura Vance, draped in an elegant mourning veil that poorly hid the triumphant, wicked smirk stretching across her face. "Julian Sterling," the High Chancellor announced, his booming voice echoing off the stone walls like a death sentence. "For the crime of high treason and conspiring with the Holloway clan to compromise the territorial defenses of the Empire, you are hereby sentenced to death by the blade. Do you have any final words?" Julian scanned the crowd, his piercing blue eyes searching desperately for only one face. He didn't care about his title, his vast lands, or his stolen wealth. His only agonizing regret was that he was going to die without ever getting to hold Clara again, without spending a lifetime making up for the cruelty he had inflicted upon her pure, devoted heart. He took a deep, steadying breath. "My only words are for my wife. She is completely innocent of any association with my life. Let her live in peace." "A touching sentiment from a traitor," Laura whispered loudly, her voice dripping with mock sorrow. "Executioner, raise the blade." The crowd gasped as the heavy iron executioner's sword was lifted high into the fading sunlight, its edge gleaming with a lethal, unforgiving light. Julian closed his eyes, preparing for the final blow. "Halt. By order of the Emperor's true evidence, stop this execution." The heavy iron gates of the tribunal courtyard burst open with a thunderous crash. The crowd shrieked and scrambled backward as two majestic midnight black stallions tore through the entrance, kicking up clouds of dust and gravel. Riding at the absolute front, her hair flying wildly in the wind, her shredded riding cloak billowing behind her like a battle standard, was Clara. Beside her rode Lord Thomas Holloway, flanked by an elite guard of territorial soldiers. Clara pulled hard on the reins, her horse skidding to a violent stop right at the base of the execution platform. She dismounted before the beast had even fully settled, sprinting up the wooden steps with a fierce, unstoppable urgency. "Guards, seize her!" Laura shrieked, her face turning a sickly, pale white as her voice cracked with sudden, absolute panic. "She is a co-conspirator. She is trying to help the traitor escape. Touch her and you challenge the entire Holloway territory." Thomas Holloway roared, stepping up behind Clara, his hand resting tightly on the hilt of his sword as his elite guards instantly surrounded the platform, weapons drawn and ready for blood. The High Chancellor raised his staff, commanding the Imperial Guards to hold their ground. "Duchess Clara, what is the meaning of this disruption?" This man has been tried and convicted based on the ledgers found in his own study. The ledgers were forged, Your Eminence. Clara's voice rang out across the courtyard, clear, powerful, and utterly commanding. Every single noble in attendance stared at her in breathless awe. She was no longer the quiet, discarded girl they had mocked at the winter gala. She was a fierce, radiant force of absolute justice. She reached into her leather satchel and slammed the original heavy ducal journals directly onto the Chancellor's podium, right alongside the letters signed by Laura. This book contains the true, unedited economic and defense records of the Sterling estate, Clara declared, her finger pointing directly at a trembling Laura. And these letters, sealed in Laura Vance's personal crest, detail a 2-year conspiracy to embezzle millions from the ducal treasury. When Julian discovered the financial discrepancies in his archives, Laura fabricated the treason plot, using stolen Holloway documents to frame her own cousin and hide her crimes. My beautiful friends, if your heart is pounding with absolute triumph right now as Clara stands up to her abuser, please take a moment to drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on her incredible strength. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, hit that button right now. You cannot miss the stunning final twist that is about to drop. The High Chancellor frowned, his sharp eyes quickly scanning the original journals and the explicit letters. As he read the concrete evidence of embezzlement and the detailed plan to forge the treason charges, his face hardened into stone. He looked up, his gaze locking onto Laura with terrifying coldness. These letters contain details only the true perpetrator would know. Lady Laura, explain yourself. It's a lie. He fabricated them. She is just a pathetic, desperate woman trying to save her husband. Laura screamed, backing away toward the edge of the platform. But as she turned to flee, Lady Vivian, realizing the ship was sinking, stepped completely away from her, leaving Laura isolated and exposed. There is one more thing, Chancellor, Thomas Holloway spoke up, a sharp, dangerous smirk on his lips. The forged documents claimed Julian met with my elders on the 14th of last month. On that exact date, Julian Sterling was physically in the Capitol Assembly, signed in by 40 witnesses, while Laura Vance was spotted at a private estate on my border. The timeline is mathematically impossible. Julian was set up. The High Chancellor slammed his staff against the stone floor. The evidence is absolute. Release Duke Julian Sterling immediately. Strip Laura Vance of all property and titles, and place her in the deepest dungeon to await a lifetime of hard labor. The crowd erupted into chaotic cheers and whispers as the heavy iron armor guards lunged forward, grabbing Laura by her luxury velvet robes. She screamed and cursed, clawing at the air as they dragged her away in absolute disgrace, her empire of lies completely destroyed. The moment the keys unlocked the heavy iron manacles around Julian's wrists, they hit the wooden floor with a heavy clatter. Julian didn't wait a single second. He lunged forward, throwing his strong arms around Clara and pulling her flush against his chest with a desperate, crushing intensity. He buried his face in her hair, his shoulders shaking as deep, silent sobs broke through his massive chest. Clara, oh God, Clara, Julian groaned, his voice cracking with a profound, overwhelming mix of love, relief, and absolute adoration. He held her so tightly it felt as though he were trying to fuse their souls together. You saved me. After everything I did to you, after all the pain I caused, you tore down the world to bring me back from the dead. Clara wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, pressing her face into the warmth of his shoulder as her own tears of relief finally flowed freely. I told you, Julian, she whispered softly against his skin. I never stopped fighting for you. Julian pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his large, warm hands gently cupping her face. Right there, in front of the entire Imperial High Council, the proudest, coldest duke in the empire dropped to his knees before his wife. He looked up at her with eyes swimming with unconditional devotion and a lifetime of earned regret. He took her hands, pressing a soft, lingering kiss against her knuckles. I spend my whole life punishing the one person who truly loved me, Julian whispered, his voice carrying across the quiet courtyard. I don't deserve your grace, Clara. But I swear to you before the heavens and every soul present, I will spend every breath I have left proving to you that my heart, my title, and my entire soul belong only to you. Will you let me earn you back? Clara looked down at her husband, her heart finally swelling with a deep, radiant warmth that washed away every single scar of the past 3 months. The victory was absolute. The justice was served. 6 months passed, and the suffocating gray fog that had once held the Sterling estate in a permanent winter grip finally dissolved into a brilliant golden spring. The towering iron gates stood wide open, no longer a barrier to a cold prison, but a welcoming entrance to a house rebuilt on a foundation of genuine love and profound respect. The gardens, once frozen and dead, were now alive with a vibrant explosion of rare wildflowers and blooming crimson roses, their sweet fragrance carrying on the warm, gentle breeze. Inside the grand estate, the dark, drafty rooms of the eastern wing had been permanently closed. Clara's belongings had long since been moved into the master suite in the heart of the mansion, a sunlit sanctuary filled with warmth, music, and the constant, soft laughter of a couple who had survived the darkest storm. Clara stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the drawing room, wearing a soft, flowing gown of pale blue silk. A gentle, radiant smile graced her lips as she looked down at the courtyard, where Arthur Pendleton was directing the staff to set up tables for the upcoming spring festival. The house had been restored to its former glory, the whispering maids replaced by loyal servants who treated their duchess with the absolute reverence she deserved. A pair of strong, familiar arms wrapped tenderly around Clara's waist from behind. She leaned back against the broad, warm chest of Julian, a deep sense of total peace washing over her as he rested his chin gently on her shoulder. Julian looked healthier, the dark shadows of resentment completely erased from his striking features, replaced by a soft, enduring tenderness that shone brightly in his deep blue eyes. "You are staring out the window again, my love," Julian whispered, his voice low and rich, vibrating pleasantly against her back. He pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the side of her neck, his hands gently sliding down to interlock his fingers with hers. "Are you making sure I haven't hidden any more secrets in the archives?" Clara laughed softly, turning around in his embrace to face him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, right over the steady, strong beating of his heart. "The only secrets left in this house, Duke Sterling, are the ones regarding how many sweets you've been sneaking from the kitchen before dinner." Julian smiled, a genuine boyish warmth lighting up his face, a look he now reserved exclusively for her. He reached up, his thumb gently tracing the smooth line of her jawline. Every single day for the past 6 months he had kept his vow. He had courted her with a fierce, unwavering devotion, listening to her thoughts, validating her feelings, and placing her at the absolute center of his life. The cold, proud man who had married her to punish her was entirely gone, replaced by a husband who cherished the very ground she walked upon. "I will gladly confess to that crime," Julian murmured, his gaze locking onto hers with a depth of absolute adoration that still made her breath catch. "As long as my punishment is to spend another evening listening to you read by the hearth. Clara, every morning I wake up beside you I thank the heavens for your grace. You taught me how to feel again. You saved my life and you gave me a future I never dreamed I could have." "We saved each other, Julian," Clara replied softly, her eyes shining with tears of pure happiness. "We took the broken pieces of a trap meant to destroy us, and we built something beautiful from the ruins. My beautiful, wonderful family, our journey together has finally brought us to this perfect moment of peace and earned happiness." Seeing Clara and Julian's love blossom from the ashes of betrayal is a beautiful reminder that true love and resilience can conquer even the deepest shadows. Take a moment to drop one final comment down below to share your favorite part of their story, and celebrate Clara's ultimate triumph with us. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure to hit that button right now and join our incredible family so you never miss another heart-pounding, emotional adventure. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for watching, for your incredible support, and for riding through the storm with us. Julian smiled down at her, his heart swelling with a profound, overwhelming fulfillment. He bent his head, his lips meeting hers in a soft, slow, and deeply passionate kiss that sealed their new beginning. It was a kiss filled with the sweet promise of a lifetime of shared dreams, unyielding loyalty, and a love that would never again be taken for granted. As they walked out onto the sun-drenched balcony hand in hand to greet their people, the cheers of the territory echoed across the valley. The past was finally behind them, the scars had turned into strength, and as they looked toward the horizon, they saw only a beautiful, limitless future stretching out before them, united forever in love, trust, and absolute peace.